First trip to America, and you meet him on the streets of Boston.
Yes. He was in Boston for the ANC to raise money and to thank his supporters in America. I had the assignment of staking out the hotel where he was staying, 4 o'clock in the morning. It didn't seem like a good assignment at the time. And all of a sudden, I see this gentleman walking down the street. As I'm walking down the street, and I lean forward, and I look, and he turns to me in this gentle way and says, "Yes, brother," with that beautiful baritone voice. And thinking as a reporter, and I said, "Mr. Mandela, I don't want to take much of your time, sir. If I can ask you one question, what is the one thing in life you know for sure?" He paused for a moment and said, "The one thing in life I know for sure is this: good and evil are constantly at war, and good men must choose." Nelson Mandela chose, and he changed the world, changed his country. David, in thinking about this moment, one of his many wonderful quotes, he said, not long after his release from prison, "I can rest only for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not yet ended." Today it ended.
Today it did end. A short time ago, President Jacob Zuma telling South Africa and the world that we had lost really a global icon of peace. And we want to take a look at live pictures coming out of South Africa at this hour. This is outside the home where Nelson Mandela spent his final weeks. And you heard Byron there talk about a very humble man shortly after his release from prison, his first trip to America. And here was a young reporter on the streets of Boston approaching him, and he said, nodding, "Yes, I am Nelson Mandela." And it was not long we traveled to South Africa along with the First Lady, Michelle Obama, and it was her opportunity to meet Nelson Mandela in his waning days. She brought her daughters with her, Sasha and Malia. And here's what Michelle Obama told me shortly after meeting Nelson Mandela. What was it like in that room?
Surreal, something I never thought would happen in my lifetime for me. It was powerful because his presence in and of itself is powerful.
What did you say to him?
I told him, you cannot imagine how important your legacy is to who I am, to who my husband is. And I just said, thank you, thank you, thank you.
That sat with me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The First Lady of the United States telling Nelson Mandela during her trip just a couple of years back to South Africa, shortly after she became First Lady here in America. I want to bring in our Chief Foreign Correspondent, Terry Moran, who joins us now from our London bureau. And Terry, this is very much a global headline. The world mourning the loss of Nelson Mandela.
No question about it, David. This is a man who, as Jacob Zuma, the president of South Africa, said, was the founder of the Democratic Republic of South Africa. South Africa is an old country, but its democracy is very young, and it was Nelson Mandela who created that democracy, and that was the miracle that astonished the world and made him such a world figure. He was well known while he was in prison, but when he came out of prison, there was a great question. What would happen in the revolution in South Africa? Would it be a terrible bloodbath? Would they get through the passage to democracy from tyrannous apartheid? And it was because of Nelson Mandela and his character that they did. And the world recognized a peacemaker, and he developed a moral stature in the world that helped him bring South Africa back into the world community, helped it reintegrate it into the world economy, and also helped him play a role in various hotspots around the world. I remember when he came to the White House a couple of times. Of course, he was very close to President Bill Clinton, and frankly, he couldn't stand the policies of President George W. Bush, which he saw as imperialistic. And that was a bit of a PR problem for the Bush White House. Of course, he saw in the election of Barack Obama the kind of change towards a multiracial society that he saw in South Africa as well. So it wasn't just in South Africa that Nelson Mandela was a revolutionary. It was his moral stature around the world and the way he used it that made a difference.
There was tremendous respect from leaders around the world for Nelson Mandela. Terry, our thanks to you. And the first quotes are coming in from presidents in this country. President George W. Bush releasing a statement just a moment ago. Laura and I joined the people of South Africa and the world in celebrating the life of Nelson Mandela. President Mandela was one of the great forces for freedom and equality of our time. He bore his burdens with dignity and with grace. and our world is better off because of his example. That from President George W. Bush just a short time ago. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl. And John, certainly President Obama has been made aware of the news of the loss this afternoon. Are we hearing anything yet from the president?
The White House is well aware of this. Obviously, this is something they've been tracking for a long time. No official statement yet. I expect one shortly, but I can tell you, David, Nelson Mandela was a towering influence on President Obama, an inspiration. If you look right now on the screen, that is the one and only photograph of President Obama and Mandela together. It happened from the one time that Obama got to meet his hero. It was when he was a young freshman senator, newly elected senator, and Mandela was visiting Washington. He had that meeting, the single photo, as you can see, Obama in silhouette. The president, back when he was Senator Obama, wrote a foreword to a book by Nelson Mandela, and the words here give you a sense. And by the way, the pictures you're seeing right now, that is the president in the cell where Nelson Mandela spent 17 years imprisoned on Robben Island in South Africa, 17 of the 27 years that Nelson Mandela spent in prison. We were on that trip. The president visited South Africa earlier this year. He had hoped to get a chance to have one last meeting with Mandela. Mandela was in no condition for such a meeting, but the president visited that cell, visited Robben Island, went out into the quarries where Nelson Mandela and the other prisoners were forced to do hard labor. It was clearly a very emotional visit for the president. As you see, he brought Michelle. He talked about Mandela's influence on his life. And in this foreword that President Obama, then Senator Obama, wrote to the book by Mandela, he said, "To many of us, he was more than just a man. He was a symbol of the struggle for justice, equality, and dignity in South Africa and around the globe. His sacrifice was so great that it called upon people everywhere to do what they could on behalf of human progress." And there you see the daughters got to go into that cell as well. A very emotional experience for the entire Obama family. And really, I don't think you can overstate how much of an influence Mandela has been on Barack Obama.
And John, we're learning that we should hear from the president shortly on the passing of Nelson Mandela, and quite frankly, it gives you chills to look at the images of the president, the first lady, the daughters there in that cell. And in a trip not long ago to South Africa, in the archive room, we were given the opportunity to look at some of the letters he'd written to his children, his family members, to Winnie Mandela while he was in that cell. And he would often practice the letters inside his notebook, write a draft of them before actually sending out the letter, because it was told to me that there was a quota of letters. He was only allowed so many of them a year. So he was very careful that the letters he did send out were perfectly written with precisely the message he wanted to send. And he often promised his children that if they do let me out of this prison, I will spend my final years with you. And one other story that comes to mind, the young jailer, the Afrikaner who'd been hired, just a young man who'd become a very close friend of Mandela during those 17 years on Robben Island. And Winnie Mandela brought one of the grandchildren over as a new baby. She was told, you can't bring a baby into these prison walls, not even for Nelson Mandela. And then the jailer secretly took the baby, put Winnie in a holding room, took the baby to Nelson Mandela. He was able to see his grandchild, and there were tears from the leader. And I wanted to also show you a clip of Nelson Mandela's trip to America. This was a trip later than the one that you spoke of, Byron. And this was a trip to the Oprah Winfrey Show in Chicago, obviously an hour-long talk show in the afternoon. And he shows up in Chicago at the studio and sits down next to Oprah and essentially asks, now, why am I here? Take a look at the humble Nelson Mandela.
Well, I had said that you're one of the most humble person I'd ever met. I will tell you that when Mr. Mandela arrived today, he said that our producer met with him in the room, and he said, "What is the subject of today's show?" And they said, she said,
if anyone ever earned that hour on Oprah Winfrey, it was Nelson Mandela. In closing this special report, I wanted to bring in Bill Keller, senior writer, columnist for the New York Times. Bill, you worked so many years in the Johannesburg Bureau, and your thoughts this afternoon on the passing of Nelson Mandela.
Well, I mean, you know, everybody acknowledges that he's an icon and a symbol and all of that. I think what people tend to overlook and what, in my mind, made him exceptional among the sort of towering figures of the 20th century was that he was such an astute politician. I mean, when you look back over the whole trajectory of his life, he was at one time a black nationalist, and then he was a non-racialist. He opposed armed struggle, and then he took up armed struggle, and then he dropped armed struggle. He was a close partner of the South African Communist Party, and for a year or two was actually a member of the Communist Party. And yet, as a president, he was a close ally of South Africa's capitalists. In other words, he was whatever served his purpose, and he never lost sight of the basic purpose, which was ending South Africa's fiendish brand of minority rule.
And Bill, you make such a great point about what an astute politician Nelson Mandela was. And Byron, I wanted to bring you back in. So many Americans know the story of Invictus, the film not long ago in theaters about the South African soccer team. And he knew that he had to support largely a white South African team, although many had looked at that team for so many years and thought it wasn't inclusive enough for the people of South Africa, and yet he supported that team and knew in doing so he was sending a message.
Oh, without question, because in South Africa at the time, blacks loved soccer, whites loved rugby. So the sense was that was the white man's sport. But he understood that uniting his nation, he had to find common ground, and he found common ground in sport. That poem Invictus, he kept it on the cell wall of his prison, this 6-by-6-foot space he lived in for 18 years. And it was his daily reminder about.
And we are going to break away from this ABC national coverage again of the death of Nelson Mandela. Surely a sad story, not only for South Africa, but for people all across the world. We are going to continue to follow that story, bring you the national coverage coming in from South Africa, from our bureaus in D.C. and across the world. We'll have more on the death of Nelson Mandela here on ABC 57 later on in our newscast.
And right now the temps, they are dropping. It is not just a cold snap. The dip down into the 20s, yes, it is here to stay.
Also tonight, do you think $15 an hour is just too much to pay fast food workers? Well, a few Michiana moms on minimum wage want you to hear from them before you decide.
And another heartbreaking case of bullying down in Rochester in the school system there. Parents say administrators are turning a blind eye while some students consider suicide. Well, breaking news that is just coming into our newsroom, obviously, here tonight. Moments ago, South Africa's former president, Nelson Mandela, has died. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Dorman.
And I'm Kim Chappell. Just to give you a little recap of the impact that this 95-year-old made in his lifetime. He is the former president of South Africa. He was in the hospital for most of this past summer with a reoccurring lung infection. He left the hospital on September 1st, but continued to receive medical care at home. Now, Mr. Mandela had often been called an anti-apartheid hero. His health has been failing in recent years, but again, former South African President Nelson Mandela has died at the age of 95. Coming up here on ABC 57 News at 5:30, we're going to go live to Washington for reaction to that leader's death. Be sure to stay with us for the continuing coverage of this breaking news story. And back here at home right now, ABC 57 is on top of two breaking news scenes. We have reporters live at the scene of a shooting in South Bend and on Olive Street. Also, we are live tonight in Fulton County where a semi has crashed right into a home. We'll get to both of those stories in just a moment, but our other big story tonight is the huge drop in temperatures. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kim Chappell.
And I'm Brian Dorman. We've had the first warning all week long that the temperatures are about to drop and drop far. 30 degrees from our high temperature today.
Let's head over to the ABC 57 First Warning Neighborhood Weather Center where our chief meteorologist Jamie Martin has the very latest on just how cold it is going to get outside. Jamie.
Hey guys, yeah, definitely a huge swing. Our highs today way back around midnight. We've been watching the mercury drop all day long. One thing that hasn't been dropping though, any snow showers in our area yet, but we're watching things very carefully to our south on ABC 57 First Warning Doppler radar. That's where most of the snow and the mix is right now. In fact, a real mess from Indianapolis south where we're going to be on the northern extent of the system. So eventually we will pick up a little bit of light snow possible, but right now it is fairly quiet, but we're cloudy. 28 degrees right now in Benton Harbor. If you're going to be heading out, make sure you are layered up because we're going to keep those temperatures right there in the mid to upper 20s all the way through 10 p.m. and it's going to feel even colder with the wind chills. We'll have all those numbers coming up in just a few minutes. Kim.
And now we want to get to that breaking news happening right now out of Fulton County where you can see right there on your screen a semi-trailer lost control and went crashing right through that home. Let's get right out to ABC 57's Emily Evans who just got to that scene. Emily, can you walk us through what happened out there today?
Well, guys, I just got to this scene about 10 minutes ago. Take a look behind me. You can see they're about to pull out this tanker right now. It was hauling vegetable oil, from what I'm told, out of Winter Haven, Florida, from the woman that lives in this house. She said she wasn't home when the tanker went into her house, but she came home to it early this afternoon. She said from what she's heard, the tanker crashed into her home around 2 or 2:30 this afternoon. She says all of her pets are okay. They just put up the Christmas lights, and the Christmas tree's still intact, they say, but definitely devastated to see this tanker, which was completely in the home. Only the back end was hanging out. So I'm working to talk to authorities here tonight and find out more for you. We'll bring that coming up at 6. Reporting live in Akron, Indiana, Emily Evans, ABC 57 News.
And we are on top of a second breaking news story here tonight. This one out of South Bend. A second shooting in just 2 days in the city. This afternoon, someone fired off shots right there at the corner of Olive and Frederickson near downtown. It happened at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Right now, ABC 57's Marissa Kirby is live on the scene with all of the details for us tonight. Marissa.
Brian, when police got to the scene, they found the man laying just behind me in the street. Now, they did receive that call around 2:30 or 3 o'clock this afternoon. They received that call around 2:30 or 3 o'clock this afternoon. The victim was shot in the leg, and police are still looking for a suspect. They say this all may have started after a fight.
The only thing we've been told thus far is that there was a confrontation that lasted a very short duration. At least one shot was fired. Our victim was hit.
Now, the victim is recovering in the hospital. Police believe there may be 2 suspects who fled in a white vehicle. If you know anything about the shooting, you're asked to call South Bend Police Department. Live in South Bend, Marissa Kirby, ABC 57 News.
And also tonight, police are still looking for a suspected gunman from yesterday's shooting on South Kenmore Street. We were the first on the scene last night when we broke that story on ABC 57 News at 6. The victim was shot in the thigh, and new here tonight, we have learned that a bleeding artery was patched up, and he is now in stable condition in the hospital tonight.
Tonight we are hearing another heartbreaking story of bullying out of Rochester. Yesterday at 5 o'clock, we shared one family's story of harassing notes and gun threats left on lockers.
And tonight, another mother is coming forward saying the school also ignored the bullying against her daughter, who is now on suicide watch. ABC 57's Emily Evans has their story.
It's another heartbreaking story. Another young girl bullied and living with fear and self-doubt. And now another mother is asking her community to come together tonight after that bullying nearly drove her daughter to suicide.
She wasn't bullied because she was too fat or too skinny or had acne or, was ugly. It was simply because these girls just decided that they didn't like her.
Verbally harassed at her middle school, the bullying also came in anonymous text messages. As months passed, she says, the harassment escalated, classmates telling the girl she was worthless.
Then she proceeded to tell me that she just wanted to kill herself. We believe if you take away your God-given life that you go to hell. And I told her that, and she said, I don't care. I'm living in hell.
That's when she decided to admit the girl to the Michiana Behavioral Center in Plymouth, where the 7th grader spent 4 days and 5 nights on suicide watch.
To make that decision to admit her and leave my baby there under someone else's care while she's crying and scared and begging me not to leave her there was a decision that I should have never have had to make.
She says the bullying has taken a toll on the entire family.
Her older sister found her suicide letter, which was really hard to find, just telling us all that she was sorry and that she loved us.
And that was ABC 57's Emily Evans reporting. Also tonight, this South Bend man accused of murder is set to stand trial on December 17th. Jermon Gavin is one of 2 men charged with murdering Alejandro Tinoco almost a year ago. Today's court appearance was a hearing to set a trial date. This morning, ABC 57 mistakenly reported that Gavin was to appear in court to be sentenced. We do regret that error. We will have more on this murder case as it gets closer to trial.
What do we want? What do we want now?
Today, fast food workers and civil rights groups all over the nation took part in protests and rallies to raise the minimum wage. In the state of Indiana, minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. That means many families are living below the poverty line. Today, ABC 57's Jasmine Norwood talked with people who work for minimum wage to get a better understanding of their struggle. Jasmine, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Today, both mothers I talked with tell me that even though they work hard, it's nearly impossible for them to take care of their families while they're only making minimum wage.
If we made more money, we could actually be able to take care of ourselves instead of having the government give us financial assistance.
I can't afford everything I need because making $7.25 an hour don't get you nowhere.
Christina Larison is a mother of 4. She tells me to say she's struggling is an understatement.
My last check was $244. Yeah, so that really, I have to buy diapers, pull-ups, it adds up.
Larison works 6 days a week, but at this rate, in 1 year, she will have only made about $15,000.
I'm the only one doing it by myself. It's hard. And like the cost of living's going high, so everything's going up.
And for food servers who rely on tips. Even though the work is there every day, their income is very inconsistent.
We go home with little or nothing, and we rely on our $2.50 an hour to pay our bills. And it does get difficult at times because it's just hit or miss. You do not know what's going to happen that day.
The nationwide protests today are pushing to rethink the idea of minimum wage and to put everyone on a livable wage of at least $15 an hour.
I think that would ease my mind a lot. I wouldn't go into work wondering if I'm going to be able to pay my electric bill.
Now, there are a number of companies that do start their employees off at $15 an hour, one of them being local sheet metal workers here in town. I did talk with a few of them today, and you will hear from them tonight at 6. Reporting live in South Bend, Jasmine Norwood, ABC 57 News.
Well, before you have dinner, you will not believe what we uncovered at area grocery stores. How about mold and mouse droppings? Where and what stores? Just ahead.
And we continue to follow breaking news tonight in the death of Nelson Mandela. We are expecting to hear from the president just ahead.